Welcome back to Athena's Listening Crew, where we celebrate women who said, "Watch me," and then actually did it. I'm Lena. Today's guest is Melinda Moulton in Vermont, and trust us, you'll want to settle in for this one. Melinda lost her mother at 12, and by 17, she was on her own at a New York secretarial school and somehow found her way to Harvard, working alongside the scientists who discovered DNA. At 22, she and her husband built their stone house in Vermont by hand while living in a tent with their toddler. Then came 40 years as CEO, redeveloping the Burlington waterfront, turning a wasteland into a thriving landmark, leading with a social and environmental mission long before it was trendy. When COVID hit, she waived rent for over 100 tenants and did not lose a single one. When powerful interests tried to push her out, she fought back and won. Today, Melinda is a filmmaker, author, talk show host, grandmother, and a cliff diver. So we hope you enjoy this one because, yes, she did all of that. Welcome, Melinda.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just delighted to be with you today.
Well, we are delighted as well to have you on our show. And so we like to ask, first off, just to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and we can start from there.
Well, I originally was from Pennsylvania, as you were, right, Lena? You
Yes.
too are from Pennsylvania. And I ended up in Vermont about 56 years ago. And I've been here ever since. We built a little house on this meadow when we were in our early 20s, stone by stone. We built it. And so I've been living in Vermont now for, yeah, almost 56 years.
And that was like, I watched that video on your website, and that was like an amazing story. Like, just moving up there, living in a tent, like trying to figure it out as you're building the house. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'm from, as you know, Lena, I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania, which is very close to Philly and New York. So I'm a city girl. And when I ended up on this mountain, all my friends were like, "What in God's name are you going to do in Vermont? I mean, really? You're going to live in a tent? I mean, what are you doing?" Especially my girlfriends. And I was like, "I don't know, but I love this guy. I don't know why I'm here, but I'll make sure it works." And I did. So thank heavens. Vermont's an incredible state, and it's been very kind to me. So I'm happy I landed here. That's sort of how I got here. That's kind of the early part of my life. I lost my mother when I was 12. So that was a real
Mhm.
struggle for me to learn how to be a woman at the age of 12 as you're about to go through puberty. After she died, I developed anorexia,
Hmm.
lived with that for a while. And it was a real struggle to get through the loss of my mom. But anyway, that was a real influencer in my life.
Yeah.
Did you have any support around that? Like, do you have,
Well, back then there wasn't a lot of support. I mean, that was in 1962, and they didn't do therapy for young people. They just told you to buck up and move on,
Hmm.
get over it. And when I came down with anorexia, nobody knew what that was back in those days. They
Hmm.
just thought I was being stubborn and not eating, and it really frustrated my father a lot. And so no, I never had any therapy, or no one ever really helped me get through it. Everybody just sort of moved on. That's the way people did things back then. Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of find it interesting because when I was watching the video, you were talking about how the loss of your mother, how that impacted who you are today, which I totally can see that. And then your father kind of dictating where you went to school. Yet when you came out, you became this force to be reckoned with, like afterwards, and you just exploded.
Well, my dad ran a large general contracting business in Pennsylvania, and I'd go to the office with him every Saturday. Um, and Sunday. I mean, he worked on weekends, and I learned how to use all the accounting machines, and I'd sit with him and watch. I'd go to his bid events. I mean, this was when I was just a little 5, 6, 7-year-old girl, and so business was always my thing. And when I
Hmm.
wanted to go into medical school, I wanted to study medicine and be a doctor. He said, "No, no, no. I mean, back then you didn't talk back to your parents. At least I didn't. I mean, my father was probably a misogynist. I mean, I don't want to degrade him, but he had a lot of daughters, and I think he And I think, quite frankly, I think I was his favorite, because I was probably the most like him. And he knew I had a business mind. I had gotten into a couple of schools in Massachusetts, and he said, no, no, no. Right before I was about to go to school, he said, no, I'm going to take you to New York to Catherine Gibbs. It's a secretarial school. And Catherine Gibbs in the early 1900s set up this school because women were always serving men, and she wanted to have a business school that would teach women to work for male executives so that they could eventually become their own CEOs and run their own
Hmm.
businesses. And that was her vision. And it was very popular back then. I mean, all the big shot CEOs in the country knew what Catherine Gibbs was, and you could get a job like that out of school. So he drove me into New York, met with the president, and next thing I know, I'm living at the Barbizon Hotel for Women at 63rd and Lexington, going to Katie Gibbs with like the girl, the daughter of the Goodyear family, and you know, other prominent young women who parents wanted them to get into the business world. And then from there, I was able to get the job at Harvard with Dr. Watson of Watson and Crick, the
Hmm.
DNA guys who discovered DNA. And then I was able to take courses while I was at Harvard. And so Katie Gibbs placed me really well. And the education I learned there, I I did shorthand. I still think in shorthand. And
Hmm.
that was a language for me. And I type 140 words per minute. And my English is pretty impeccable. I can write really well. And I learned accounting and investing and business classes. We had some liberal arts stuff. So Katie Gibbs really set me up to be a good business person. Otherwise, if I had just gone to a liberal arts college, I wouldn't have had the skills to be able to organize people and teach people and network with people and understand how to bring people together to get stuff done. And
Hmm.
it really taught me how to be a great organizer too. So I do not behoove any of that. And I honor my father in understanding what was probably right for me, although at the time I was really not. I mean, it's only 17 because I skipped a grade. So I turned 17 in May, and that fall I was dropped off at the Barbizon Hotel for Women in New York and given a checkbook and told, all right, we'll see you at
Wow.
Thanksgiving. Only 70. I was like, wow, okay. Um, but he obviously knew what I needed. He died when I was 24. So
Hmm.
he never really saw what I did, which I always felt sad about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I know, like, in the interview that I watched, you mentioned that every job you got was because of the college that you went to. And I kind of disagree with that a little bit. I think it brought you up front, but I think your personality, like who you are, showed through. You're like, yeah, I went to this, I could do all this, but let me tell you what else I can do for you. And that's the kind of like charisma I got from that video. And I was like, I think, yeah, that looked good on paper, but your personality, I think, is what really led you. The combination or the personality on top of that has led you to everything that you did.
Well, thank you for that, Renee. I, you know, I always was when I was a little girl, I had a tomboy club. And now I like to use the word tom girl rather than tomboy, but it was a tomboy club. And
Hmm.
I got all the girls in the neighborhood to join this club. And there were probably 12 or 15 of us. And I, of course, was the president. Bob was the VP. And we ran this club and we raised money for nonprofits and we did lemonade stands and got all these old things from our parents and did these and sold their stuff for like, nickels and raised money for organizations because back in those days my mother, did work for the Red Cross and, the Easter Seals. And she would have an envelope and she'd send us out with this envelope. And we go around to all the neighbors and we put in their name and what they gave us and they'd give us cash and,
Hmm.
and we'd have to reconcile. So I was really into fundraising. And so I put this club together. But in an early age, I just felt like I was kind of bossing people, being sort of the big bossy one and saying, no, this is what we're going to do. Let's do this, this, this. So I guess, yeah, maybe my personality was kind of showed whoever I was interviewing with that I was kind of a can-do person and, you know, grab things and make stuff happen. That's probably true. That's probably true. I've never thought about it, but thank you for bringing that to my
Yeah, you
attention.
sound like you're a born leader. Like
Yeah.
you're just born to lead.
And I'm a
And
bossy too. Anyway, so thank you for that. I've never thought about that. I'm gonna have to share that with my family.
Then from you got out, you were working with Watson and then went on to, and then from there, where'd you go after that?
Well, I actually worked for Mark Patashny, who was a professor. I ran his office and
Hmm.
typed up all his research papers. And he got me into the microbiology department where I started plating phage, which was counting phage. And they were doing cancer research and started getting into some of that stuff, which was kind of boring. But I met my husband at a friend's house, my future husband. And at the same time, I was actually dating that professor too. I was dating my boss. I mean, what can I say? Back then, those things happened. He was quite a bit older than me, but we were in a relationship. And in the meantime, I met my future husband at a dinner party, and wasn't that impressed because he was very kind of grabby, which men were back then. I mean, they just
Hmm.
tended to be a little bit more. Well, men are still very grabby, but they're more careful, I think. But he was very affectionate. And eventually he told me it was because he knew that the minute he saw me, that I was the woman he was going to marry. But I was not impressed. I was like, I didn't really like this guy. Well, he came back in the spring and asked if he could stay at my house. He took me to the movies and to dinner, and then I told him to sleep in the guest room. And I woke up the next morning and was doing naked yoga on my floor. And that was it. That was the end of it. I just was like, okay, this is the guy.
That's
And I had to, you're the guy. So I had to go into my boss boyfriend and tell him I was going to that this guy was going to take me to Vermont for the summer. We were going to live at a sort of commune and pitch a hammock in some barn and live up there for the summer. And he said, okay, we'll come back. I hope you come back. And I said, well, I don't know if I will, but I'll let you know. So I did. I came and I started getting, checks from Harvard. It was the weirdest thing, but I was getting they kept sending me my checks. I mean, it was really weird. And then my father started writing letters to the guy whose house with my last name of the guy who actually rented the house. So I was Melinda Hastings or what it was just very weird. People didn't really know what I was doing, but everybody wanted me back. Well, I had a great summer in Vermont, and then my boyfriend Rick, who's now my husband, convinced me to go to Colorado so he could finish his degree at DU. And I said, absolutely. So we went back to Harvard. We both went into his office, to Mark's office, and Rick said, I'm taking her to Denver with me. And he said, by the way, while I was in Vermont, he took care of my cat. Mean, this poor man, he took care of my cat while I was gone. I mean, so we went and he said, well, I wish you both well. I get it. And so I went off to Denver with Rick. He finished his degree. I got pregnant with my son. I was told I would never have children because they didn't know that when you have anorexia, you stop
Hmm.
getting your period. And everybody told me, all the physicians my dad took me to across the country said, she'll never have kids. She doesn't have her period. And so when I got pregnant with my son, that was really great. So I moved in with Rick in June. I was pregnant by October. We spent the year in Denver, and then Christmas following, after my son was born, we came back to Vermont on Christmas Eve in a huge tractor trailer with my car in it, and my cat, and my son, my baby, my 5-month-old baby. And we arrived at Rick's parents' house in Shelburne, Vermont on Christmas Eve, and they were having this huge Christmas Eve party, and they didn't know we were coming. We thought we'd surprise them. And they were not amused. I mean, they were like, oh my God, what? What are you doing? What are you doing here? So we moved into this little grandmother apartment they had for my mother-in-law's mother who had passed away. And then they announced like 3 months later they were moving to Vero Beach, Florida. We're out of here. And we were like, what? I mean, we moved back because your grandparents, we thought you'd, maybe help
Hmm.
us with the kid, whatever. But they left. And then we got a house in Starksboro, and then we bought this land and built the house, and we just settled in here. And that's sort of how we got here, was to
Hmm.
come home to be close to the grandparents who then fled to Vero Beach. Said, no, we can't handle this. A couple of crazy hippies. You all smell like marijuana, and their son, my husband's hair was down to his shoulders, and they were like, oh, this is not what we paid to send you to school for. But anyway, so that's kind of how we ended up in Vermont with with a lot of other people who landed here because the other piece of this was the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
Okay. And Mark at Harvard was very good friends with Daniel Ellsberg. So I was marching with Daniel Ellsberg, who was the Pentagon Papers, in this group called, this major group of thousands of people called the Coalition Against the War in Vietnam. And Rick got his card that said he was going to be drafted and went in to for his interview and told them a bunch of stuff. And he ended up getting out, not being drafted. Probably they thought he was insane or something. And he got out from being having to be drafted because, as you know, our generation thought this war was killing a lot of our friends.
Hmm.
So we moved to one of the other reasons why we wanted to be in Vermont because we wanted to be close to the border because a lot of people
Mm,
did come to Vermont to be close to the Canadian border because we were afraid that they
mm,
would come after us or whatever. We just were afraid. And
Hmm.
so a lot of really creative people moved here. I mean, that people started Gardner Supply and, Small Dog and, Seventh Generation. A lot of great young people, primarily men, came to Vermont and started these extraordinary businesses that have just really succeeded over the years. And we all were hippies, and a lot of our friends were going to jail because they were caught with a bag of weed, and
Hmm.
a lot of our friends were in prison. And we were really scared that our generation was being attacked. I mean, it's not so much like we're going through now,
Hmm.
in many ways, but we were much more, well, I don't know if we were more rebellious. There's a lot of young people out there that are really speaking up, but it's a little different now because you don't have the draft.
Hmm.
I think the draft really moved our generation. Say, wait a minute, people are getting dragged into this war and they're getting killed. And so that brought us to Vermont and close to the border. And now we're kind of glad we're close to the border.
I was gonna say, didn't it do another full
The
circle?
180. I
It
mean, we're
sounds
like,
familiar.
my kids are like, Mom, well, let's move to Vancouver. So here we are, basically 180, not 180,
Hmm.
we're 360. We're back at it again. And Vermont's a really cool place to live in right now because, we all care about being kind and loving and caring for people. So that's kind of how it all happened and how we ended up here. And we built the house. I had a tiny little trust fund where I was able to buy this meadow that you hear the birds on. And we got an FHA loan for $16,000 to build our stone house. And we read the book Living the Good Life by Helen and Scott Nearing. And they had moved to Vermont and they built a bunch of stone houses. And it's about living off the land. And we read
Hmm.
their book and they built a stone. So we used their method to build our stone house. And we were only 22 years old. And our son was 2. And I have a picture of him with no clothes on, holding a hammer. Uh, 2 years old, waddling
Love how
around
you
this.
guys embrace nudity.
He's,
Nudity.
he's waddling around this construction site that's really dangerous. I mean, he's lucky he lived. And we were all like stoned and drinking beer, and all of our friends had come from college to help us build it. And it was just it was just an extraordinary experience. But then I think you probably heard the story how we were living in this tent and I was working at the hospital, so I'd have to wash myself in a tub with a hose coming out of this basement that had no floor. There was no roof on the house, and we were living in this tent, and I had to wash myself every morning to work at the hospital, and drop my son off at daycare, wash him up too. And he got an ear infection. It was like mid-October, and we woke up and there was like 6 inches of snow on the ground. And Rick and I weren't married. We didn't get married for 16 years. So I wasn't married to this guy. And I was like, I don't want to curse on your show, but you are effing crazy. I mean, we have this 2-year-old baby, 3-year-old baby. It's 6 inches of snow. It's, 28 degrees, 25 degrees, and we're living in a tent. And you say you're going to get the roof on by Christmas. I mean, I I wear platform shoes and I like to dress up and
Mm.
I can't live like this. I stink all the time. I mean, this is terrible. So I left. I ran down the hill. I took the car and drove down the hill and I said, I'm out of here. And I moved in with a girlfriend. And I was like, I can't do this. This is so there was a knock on the door 3 days later, and it was Rick. And he had his suitcases and he said, look, can I come live with you guys? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. And he said, I'll have a roof on by Easter. And I said, okay, come live with me. So he did. And he had a job working as a lighting director at the local PBS television station. So he did. He came down every day after work and we got the roof on by Easter and we moved in. There was no second floor. We had no phone. The running water was still from the basement in a tub. Our heat was a little wood stove on the second floor, on the first floor here. There was only a plywood floor. There was plastic on all the windows. We had no windows in. We did have a stove, but it was really funky. And it was, really rough, but it was March and the weather was warming up and the wood stove was good. And we had an FHA loan for $16,000 and the interest rate was like a 0.5%. So our mortgage every month was $82 a month.
Wow.
And we had this
Half a
beautiful little,
percent
we had,
interest.
well, that was FHA, the
Yeah.
Federal Housing Association. If you didn't have money as a young person, you could fill out this form
Hmm.
and you'd get this money at a very low. So they had an investigator, I guess he was an investigator or an inspector
Hmm.
who had an office. They had an office in Burlington, Vermont, and he would come out every month to come up to the road. We live on this very steep road. In the winter, it's impassable. You have to, we walked it for 10 years. We couldn't drive up it in the winter because it's so dangerous. And he would walk up to inspect the house, which, it didn't follow any codes. We didn't really do anything that we, said we were going to do, federal guidelines, or because we were like, So we just did what we wanted to do. And he'd come up here in this suit and he'd meet with me like, we'd be, you know, with our long hair and braids and the naked kid running around. And after like 4 or 5 visits, he said, look, I'm just going to sign off on this. And, you guys are good. I'm not coming out here anymore. And he just signed off on the loan. And we had no more inspections. It was a wild. So that was that. And then I got my job, I still had my job with the University Health Center. And then I came home to have my daughter. She was a home birth and she was born on town meeting day on March 7th. And that was a trip. I had it here because they said my son couldn't come to the hospital. And I said, well, he was 5.5. And I said, well, I want him to see this. I didn't know if it was a boy or girl. I said, I
Yeah.
want to see his sibling born. And they were like, well, we can't do that. I mean, that's going to traumatize him for the rest of his life. We can't. I was like, well, then I'm doing it at home.
Hmm.
So I
And
found
what year was this?
1978.
Okay. All right.
So, and midwifery was not a big deal then.
Hmm.
So I found a midwife, a doctor, Dr. Walke, who ended up leaving Vermont because they were so, pissed off at her for doing these home births. And she ended up moving to Texas to do home births, which is really interesting. And we
Mm.
also had a nurse here. So we had three professionals, and it was a beautiful birth. And my son was the first one to hold his little sister. And in second grade, he wrote an essay about the most important moment in his life was watching his little sister get born.
Oh,
And they're really tight. He's 54 years old and she's 49, and they're just like
it's
this.
beautiful.
Hmm.
And so we had Mariah, and then I stayed home for 5 years. And we made a movie called Legends of American Skiing. We raised money from, wealthy, important skiers who wanted to see legends of American skiing made. And it starts, I have a great poster here, but it starts in the mid 1800s, 1700s, and brings you up to 1941. And it ended up being this extraordinary. Documentary filmmakers don't make any money once the film's released. They just don't. Well, maybe Ken
Hmm.
Burns does, but certainly Rick Moulton did. So we raised money to make the film, and it supported us while we
Hmm.
sat and made this movie. And then the movie was released. It was really beautiful. It got lots of awards and stuff. And that was when we were 28 years old. But then the movie was released and we had no money. So we went on food stamp. I mean, it was awful.
Wow.
And I was with this little baby and I'm like, filmmaking isn't making, it doesn't work. And Rick's like, well, that's what I do. And otherwise we could, otherwise we should move to LA or go to New York. I mean, that's what I am. And I'm like, well, but we're living up in this mountain. I have to walk up and down the road with my laundry, take it to Bristol. We're in poverty.
Yeah.
And I said, the only one who's really employable then is me. And the kids were like, no, mom, mom, we love your cookies, don't leave. And I was like, I'm the one that's got to go get a job. Because he was, Rick, he was a ski instructor and he loved to ski. And he just was not somebody who was going to go work for somebody. It was not in his DNA.
Hmm.
And he had quit the job at ETV so he could come and finish the house. So he wasn't working there anymore. And it was a rough time for us in our marriage because we weren't married. I was pissed off because I wanted to stay home and be a mom, and I had to be the one to go to work. So I was driving out of Boston with a girlfriend, probably complaining about my state of affairs, as women do, right? We go, "Meh." Anyway, and I was driving down with my good friend, and I open up the paper and there's this job for this development company. It's going to develop the Burlington waterfront. And I went, oh, this sounds interesting. I understand construction. So I came home, and back then you had a typewriter. There weren't computers. I
Right.
had a little electric typewriter, and I had to use a carbon to make a carbon copy. So I had to
Hmm.
type my resume, and then I had to, and you didn't have whiteout. You had to like it would just, it's and I was a Katie Gibbs girl, so I could do it, not make too many mistakes. So I did this, really probably miserable resume and typed a letter of introduction and they interviewed me and they had a lot of folks to interview and it was a secretarial job, but it was really more of a director of operations job where there was a lot more responsibility, and there were probably 100 people who applied and I had 6 or 7 interviews, and eventually when I took over the company I got my file from the people who interviewed me, and there was an accounting firm that worked for these these folks who owned the property, and it said she has really crazy hair, and she wears a lot of leather, and her hair is kind of crazy, but she's really smart, and I think she would be good. I think she'd do the job, and I thought that was so funny that they didn't like but back then you had frizzy hair. Anyway, I got the job and I worked for this guy. Eventually he left, and the woman who owned the property with her husband, they got divorced. And I pulled together this $100 million project. The project ended up failing. She divorced this guy. I did a hostile takeover, got the property gave it to her, and left. And I got a job as a marketing director for the local chocolate company, like Champlain Chocolates. And I was traveling all over the country with a little
Mhm.
bag of chocolate doing private label, and I hated it. And I was leaving my family. Oh, and by the way, my job, when I started my job back then in 1983, I was paid $13,000 a year. And the guy I was working for made $130,000 a year.
Oh my
And when I
gosh.
left my job 4 years ago, I was making what he was making 40 years ago.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
Whoa.
And I could
Yes.
have given myself raises and stuff as the CEO, but I never did. I always did across the board 3% increases. But I never
Hmm.
gave myself any kind of big bone. I always just paid 3% to everybody in the company. And I was one of those people, and I never wanted to make more than like twice or 3 times certainly what anybody else made. So I was fine with that, but it was so weird that back then, and I did all the work. I mean, I made him look good. And
Hmm.
so Lisa called me. Lisa was the woman who owned the property. And she called me one day and she said, it was actually at night, I was brushing my teeth and we had a landline. So I had the long cord that I had pulled out and I was brushing my teeth. And I said, what is it, sweetheart? Because we stayed friends. And I would go in and help her with payroll and stuff just as a friend, because she was now trying to run this company. She was trying to sell it, actually.
Hmm.
And she said, look, she had all this property and she called me. She said, look, I really can't do this. I was educated as a teacher. I hate this. I don't want to do it. Would you just come back and help me get rid of, finish this up? And I said, no. I said, I'm not coming back to do that, but I'll come back if you partner with me and we develop the waterfront. And she said, you know what? I think we could do it better than anyone. I said, you're damn right we can. And so we fired all the big shot, noisy people, the lawyers and accountants and all those noisy people that were stealing her money. I don't want to say
Hmm.
stealing, but she was writing huge checks to these people who weren't doing much of anything. So we just got rid of all that, renamed the company, rebranded the company with a beautiful house with little sunbeams coming out of it. We became sustainable, environmental, people-centric, social redevelopers with a very strict social mission and environmental mission. And we interviewed architects to work on a plan for 2 years with us from locally. And we created the landing project and presented it to the planning commission, and we got a standing ovation. And they said, nobody's ever presented a project this thorough and this beautifully thought out than you two women. So we had the blessing of the city and we moved forward. And 40 years later, we created primarily me. I mean, I was really the front person and the CEO and Lisa was fabulous because she was the money. I mean, she was the Dow Jones heir and she had this money. You never know it. I mean, you play Pictionary with Lisa. She uses every corner of the paper because she doesn't waste any paper. I mean, she's like super cool and beautiful, loving person. And but she really deferred and would just go, you go, girl, Working
Hmm.
for a woman after all those years working for men was such a relief for me. To work with somebody who was willing to let me take credit and stand up for what I had done and be center stage of what I did and not feel like I had to do that for somebody and never be given credit for it, which is what my career was my whole life before that, right?
Hmm.
Because that's
Yeah.
kind of like what women did is they worked for powerful men and they did all the work and the men took all the credit. And so anyway, it was a beautiful relationship for 40 years. And then I just stepped down 4 years ago as she did. And she gave her the company to her son. And I hired my daughter there 20 years ago to run the Performing Arts Center. She's an Emerson grad, and so she's working there. So both Lisa's son and my daughter are now pretty much. They have a new CEO who's an incredible woman, but my daughter runs the Performing Arts Center, and so it's kind of neat that our children are at the helm of the company. And we created 250,000 square feet of built environment, and really sparked the change of the waterfront that was a wasteland. And we're the first ones to put a shovel in the ground to bring it back, to not bring it back, but to create what it is now.
Hmm.
Anyway,
And I'm glad you brought that up because I'm listening to you and it seems like you kind of went in, you and Lisa, and you built a team. So me and Renee had spoken on our side conversations about how important a team concept is and how we bring a team together. So what is I'm interested how your approach and how you pull a team together. What do you look for? That's
well, we
gonna.
we had to interview for a new accountant, so we interviewed lots of accountants. I like the guy with the leather patches on his arm. He looked like a professor. Dennis Voigt. I said, "Oh, this guy's great." He is still with Lisa. He's still her accountant. Does all of her financial stuff. So we hired him. Then we hired a lawyer that was, just a really cool, funky guy. And that was that. And so but we interviewed people. But when we did our team, we had to bring in architects, four different architects, because we had four different projects, buildings, and we wanted different architect to design each building. So we did this spreadsheet, this questionnaire that we asked each architect, and we interviewed probably 20 of them. And it was like, do you enjoy working with women? Um, do you have a sense of humor? Are you playful? I mean, the questions were like, and these guys are sitting there going, "Oh God, I love these women." I mean, they were like, it was just they were one architect from the guy was just so stunningly beautiful when he left. Lisa, we said we can't work with that guy. I mean, it was sort of reverse sexism. It was like, oh my God, he's so beautiful. No, we interviewed these, and they were all men. We had a woman who did our lead stuff and a woman engineer, but back then there weren't a lot of, this was in 1987. There weren't that many female architects. But the questions were all about, do you love animals? Are you kind to homeless people? Like that, how
Yeah.
do you feel about this and that? And they were very socially, do you understand why why climate, why saving the planet's really important? And then we graded them from like 1 to 5 on all these questions. And then we added up the numbers. And the ones that came out with the highest numbers were the 4 firms that we hired. And I just saw one of the guys yesterday over in Waitsfield at this celebration of a theater that it's their first year of being community owned. And John was there. He had this beautiful painting behind him that he had done. And John Anderson was one of the guys who sat on the landing team back in 1987. So I run into these people all the time. And the guy with the beautiful blue guy, beautiful blue eyes. I run into him all the time. And it's like so we see these people all the time, but that's how we interviewed them. As women, that's what mattered to us.
Yeah, I was going to
And then we
say
Hmm.
put,
you added your values because you have the business sense. You had you went to school, but it seems like you added what mattered to you guys, and that's what
and then we put them together in a room. In the back room is a big room, and we would say, okay, we're going to leave the room, and we want you to come with some kind of a concept of what you think this thing looks like. And they'd come and they'd work half a day, and then they'd come into our offices and present, and we worked like that back and forth. And they did this huge master plan of all of Lisa's property. And when we did go and we presented this to the planning commission, there were 100 people in the room at City Hall, all ready to go, get these women out of here. And the waterfront belongs to all of us. We own it. How dare you put anything? And people were standing up and cheering and clapping their hands and going, this is great stuff. And we were like, wow, sort of like Sally Fields. Oh my God, they love us. They really, really love us. It's one of those moments where we're like, so that's how we did it. I mean, we put that team together. And then as far as the team going forward, I mean, I had to put together subs all the time. When we did the last project, I didn't go to bid for the project. I just said, I'm going to bring in people that I love working with, and I'm going to meet with them and tell them what we're going to pay them to be part of the project. And because I love them, and out of my love for them, they'll help work with the architects to design a building that they can fit into the budget that I'm giving them. And that's not the way it's done. That's not the way development's done. And so I created this whole new concept of how to work with subs and we came in under budget. We brought the project in at $120 a square foot. When I talked to down at university, any other University of Penn or wherever I'm lecturing, everybody goes, "Oh, how could you do that?" With a stone and brick building. But it was created with love for these beautiful subcontractors, macho contracts like, oh, let's go shoot pool and smoke smokes down at, Franny O's, Melinda. I mean, these really rough and tumble contracting guys who who just loved us and said, "Yeah, we can do it for that, but we got to be sitting at the table when the architect is designing it, because we don't want him to put in $1 million stuff that we can't pay for." And the project was better because many times it's the contractor who knows how to build things. It's not always the designer, but it was
hmm
very stressful for the architect because we were bringing these contractors in to sit at the table. And the architect would be like, well, I want to do this. And they'd say, yeah, you do that, it's going to jump the price, $400,000. So why don't you design it this way? And the architect would be like, okay, whatever. And it was just this great way of
It
doing
brought
it,
them all to the table.
all to the table. And that just doesn't happen to do construction drawings. I mean, it just doesn't. The architect does them and then he submits them out to bid. And I said, we're not doing it that way. And the bid that he had come in with, the architect said it was $22 million to build that project. It was about 130,000 square feet. We brought it in at 14,000. I brought that. We
Like
ran
unheard of.
with
Yeah.
I had a construction manager, Joe Ryan, who happens to be one of my best friends, still a great friend of mine. We worked together. He was the construction manager and I was the business mind and ran the budget and everything. And we brought it in at 14 million. And so it works. And I get to tell that story,
Hmm.
you know. So that was the team. And when it was all over, I did this board. It was one of the hardest things I had to do. I had to go out to all the subs, and there were probably 30 of them, and say, can you identify who worked on this building? And And we had other buildings that we built, but this was a special one, that my most recent one that we did. And I said, I want to put a board up alphabetically of every name of everybody who worked on this building. And I want it from the person who swept the floor to
Mm.
the accountant and the lawyer's names and to the owner's name. And the subs had to go look through their payroll and figure out all the people that had worked on the project over 2 years. It was a 2.5 year project. And then they submitted the names, and I have this beautiful board in the building with 750 names of all the people that worked on the project to
Wow.
honor them, and honor their presence. I
That's
mean, that's kind of
incredible.
like what women do, right? Don't we
Mhm.
do that as women?
Yeah.
We just do things differently. It's like, I just don't want to do it that way. I don't, that felt icky to me.
Yeah. And that definitely shows up. Like you were talking in the interview that I was watching, you were talking about like during COVID and how you treated the
The
businesses that
tenants,
were the tenants.
right?
Eh, yeah.
We have over 100. We had over 100 tenants.
Hmm.
The building, and COVID hits, and so I said to the staff, "Okay, everybody's going home." And we had a staff of 7. It was a small company, and we had a staff of 7. We had maintenance crew, we had the performing arts crew, and then the admin team, which was me and Joe. And Joe was the construction manager too. He ran the property management. And I said, Joe, you go home. You have to go home. He had some health issues, and I said, you can't be here. So take your computer, go home. And then the maintenance crew, I said, I'm gonna have one person come in every day. For 7 days, you're gonna have to switch off. And then my daughter, who lives right next to me, she came in and helped me run the company. She came in because I could be with her. And
Hmm.
we went in, and right at the beginning, I did a spreadsheet with a projection of what would happen if I gave all the tenants free rent and got them through this. Now there's a triple net fee that they pay for electric, heat, the triple net expenses to sort of run their space.
Hmm.
And that was $8 a square foot. Their rent was about $22 a square foot. So I waived the rent and said, but you got to pay your triple net expenses. And we had Unilever was a big company there, and they were a national, and I wasn't going to give the nationals any breaks. It was only the local businesses, which were
Hmm.
most of them. And
Hmm.
it ended up at the end of the time, the period of costing us probably close to like $600,000. Um, but we were able to support ourselves with what we brought in, and we didn't lose one tenant. Not one of those 100 people left, and their businesses survived, and they're still there today, and they're still successful.
Wow.
And if we hadn't done that, the buildings would have cleared out. And
Hmm.
and so that was something that I felt was really important. And and in anything I did, I always had Lisa's blessing. Because the company always supported itself unless there was a project, an asset that I was creating. And if I was creating an asset for her, it was like, okay, you gotta take your money and you have to invest it in this asset. We're going to diversify your holdings and put in an asset. And in the 40 years I worked for her, the only time I asked her for money was when I was building her an asset, which now is worth a lot more than if it had been sitting in the stock market making eight
Hmm.
percent or whatever. And in the last project, I actually got a bank loan. I guess her lawyers were like, well, you need to act like a developer, like all other developers. Why should Lisa you? I said, well, because, there's going to be big interest and stuff, and there's going to be swaps. And after like doing that with a bank for a few years, it ended up costing about $3 million. And I sat down with Lisa. I said, that $3 million could have gone to you. You could have made that if you put that money into this project. And I said, this isn't working for you at all. I said, so she went in and she paid off the loan. Said, this is just been told the lawyers. That was a really stupid idea. We should have listened to Melinda. Like, I'm not going to fight all the, big lawyers in Boston. But at the end of the day, she saw that. But I was able to run that company to never cost her money unless it was to take money from her asset that was in the bank and put it into a building. And that was felt really honored with that we made a really great team. But she would have done anything if I
Hmm.
needed that. She was always there for me. I mean, she was always there for me.
Yeah. And I find the COVID of giving them free, that whole story, I just find that so amazing. And just because during COVID, the companies that shut down were the small businesses. The corporations found their way around it, however they did it, but it was the small businesses that took a hit, and you protected the small businesses.
Well, you want to know how they did it? They're the
Lied.
ones, they're no, well, they're the ones who filed with the federal government
That's what I was
Hmm.
gonna,
to
yeah,
get all
didn't
that
they?
money.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the law firms, the account, I mean, they're all the ones who had the wherewithal to file those forms and get hundreds of thousands of dollars from the
Hmm.
federal government to hold them up while they went through that. I mean, the small businesses, you know, we didn't do that. We didn't, I mean, I could have spent time trying to figure that out, but I was like, we'll just make it work. I mean, why should I go begging to the federal government? But that's what a lot of them did.
And I think was that they made it harder for the small businesses to apply. Like the big businesses jumped in first, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Well, we have no more money for you guys." If I recall hearing, it was something like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have the resources
They
of
don't
the
understand, they
staff and
don't
the
know how to do
lawyers
it.
and who is already all enthralled in all that stuff. And a mom and pop store, that takes
They
a
can't.
lot of time and trying to figure out what is what.
Well, I didn't want to figure it out. I was like, am I going to pay an accountant to do it? We don't need to do this. We're
Mm.
fine. We're supporting ourselves. We're in the black. Not at the percentage we were when everybody was paying rent, but we are
Hmm.
not in the red. And so I'm not going to go spend my time dealing with that. I have better things to do. But yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. That
Yeah.
was a good thing. That was they really they still bring that up to me.
Yeah. Nice.
And something else that happened right before I left was that the state, the railroad, and I don't know if this is in the interview you listened to, but the state, the railroad, and the city of Burlington decided they were going to run us Amtrak, which I worked for 30 years to bring into Burlington. That was my project. It eventually came. But the railroad wanted to, I don't know who this is. I'm not going to talk to him. Um, the railroad wanted a second rail line to have next to where Amtrak was coming in. I don't know who this is. I'm going to just cancel it. I'm going to shut it off. Um, um, and they wanted to put a rail line right in front of all our work to store trains so that when the Amtrak came in, the railroad could pull their freight trains and park them. And then the Amtrak would sit there overnight while they bring in trucks to siphon out the poo-poo out of the toilets. And it's like I'm about to step down from this. It's like 2.5 years. I just come out of COVID. And I got a call from Public Works says, "Hey, did you know that there's this public hearing? The mayor, the state, and the railroad, they're going to put a second rail line right in front of your project and store freight trains there." And I called Lisa. I said, "We got to go to this." And I said, "Why weren't we invited?" She said, "They don't want you to know." And I said, "Well, we're going to be there." So I called Lisa and we went to the meeting, and there they were going to put, it was all already planned. These men for a year had been planning this without even, asking us. So I turned to Lisa. I said, "Look, we got to fight this." And she said, "Well, the railroad just tried to do something in my hometown and they won. And the town spent all this money." She said, "Melinda," he said, "there's no way we're going to beat these guys. It's the city of Burlington, the state of Vermont, and the railroad." And I said, "Well, we got to try." And
Hmm.
she said, "Okay." I said, "I think it's going to cost us about 120 grand to do it." And I hired this hot shit lawyer, Richie Berger. God, what a man. And we put together a PR program and we just put up a website. We were, media was all over it. We got the Rail Council to support us because all the old rail guys loved me because for 30 years I wanted to bring back passenger rail and they loved me. I mean, when I went to the meetings, they would hug and kiss me. And I was like, "Oh, yeah." So when we presented it to the Rail Council, they're like, "How could you do?" They said to the head of the state of Vermont, "How could you do this to Melinda? This is awful. How could you do this to her?" So I got the Rail Council, everybody. And finally, after like a year and a half of fighting this, and the mayor was awful about it. He threw me out of his office one day, said, "I'm not talking about this." And I thought you wanted rail, and he was just awful. So one day, we just kept fighting and fighting. And one day the railroad called me and the railroad's lawyer, and he said, "We'd like to come talk to you." Came into the office and I had my lawyer there. And my husband, who happened to serve on the rail council, everybody loved him too. And the lawyer said, what's it going to take for you to change your mind? And I said, nothing. I said, I will keep you in court for 20 years and you will never see Amtrak pull into the back of Union Station. And that's a project I fought for 30 years. But I am willing to sacrifice that train for the work that Lisa and I did.
Yeah.
And so that's the deal, man. That's what's going to happen. And he left. And the next day he wrote me, he said, we're not going to do the second rail line. And I won. And it was like right before, I was leaving. And then I did step down step down in May. And in July, the Amtrak pulled into the back of Union Station. And I wrote what I wanted to say because I built the station, I built the train station, and I figured I'd speak, right? And I wrote the Secretary of Transportation, Joe Flynn, and I said, this is what I'm going to say. And he wrote me back and he said, no, you're not going to speak. So I emailed him and I said, why aren't I speaking? He said, oh, it's really just going to be politicians and stuff. You're not going to speak. So I arrived at the back of the station. There were probably 1,000 people there waiting for the train to pull in. And everybody was hugging and kissing me and, being very kind and loving to me. And then there was this group of dignitaries sitting in chairs with a mic. And all these men got up and spoke. And, Howard Dean, the past governor who I happen to love, the mayor, the railroad, here comes the train. And not one bit of representation from Main Street Landing, who had fought for it for 30 years, built the train station. And when it was over, 7 days approached me, Ken Picard, and he said, I got to do a story on you.
Mm.
And they did a 10-page expose on me and my life. And it started out, and the train pulled in, and Melinda wasn't at the mic. And that was like and it was such a piss off to him that happened, that he highlighted that how we were dissed from being able to honor the Amtrak coming in. And
Hmm.
it created this 10-page incredible story, about my everything that Lisa and I had done. And I got a great picture on the front of the magazine, on front of the paper. And anyway, it was kind of my upcomings, because they interviewed people who said, yeah, they were trying to screw these women and they had to fight for it.
Hmm.
So that was the end of my flying away from the company and settling in with my husband. I came home and was going to start a consulting business. And I looked at my husband. I said, you make great movies, but you are a really shitty fundraiser. I'm gonna join you, and I'm gonna become your executive producer. I'm gonna raise money for you, and we're gonna make movies together. And within a year, I had 5 projects. And he's like, I said, yeah, all those years that I worked my ass off to support the family and all this stuff. I said, now you and we're gonna work because we're we're retired. We're on fixed incomes. We
Hmm.
can't stop working, and you make beautiful movies. So we may had 6 projects, and right now the one we're working on, hopefully to release in November, is a PBS documentary on Ethan Allen, the man and the myth, for the 250th. And then I'm going to do a film on autism called The Minds of Autism, which will be more
Oh.
my film. So I raised money for him, and he's off editing today. And I changed the name of his company. I mean, think of this. This is my husband, his business mind. It's really blows my mind how he's a creative, and he's such a creative, but the whole practicality of business just is not there.
Yeah.
So his company's name's
Hmm.
Keystone Production for 50 years. So I go online and I type in Keystone Productions. What comes up but a film company in Maryland named Keystone Productions? So I turned around the computer. I said, look at this. Anybody looking for your company is going to be sent to Maryland to the company, a film. This is ridiculous. I said, your website's rickmoulton.com. I'm changing the name of your company. And he was like, oh, you can't do that. It's like, and I'm like, no, I'm doing this. I'm changing the name. I'm doing a new logo. I'm redoing your website. I'm going to completely rebrand you. And we're going to start fresh. And he was really not happy about it. But I said, the only way we're going to make a go of this is if you let me run this business. And I took, I was a little bossy, Miss Bossy, and took over. And now he's having the time of his life making this incredible film. And we're a really good team. It was like back in the 20s when we were doing Legends.
Because on top of that, all of that, you also have your own show that you host, right?
Moments with Melinda.
Moments with Melinda.
26 years. It was on the waterfront with Melinda. Now my daughter has that show. And I started my own. I do it on Zoom and I do it from here. And I can talk to people from all over the world. But yeah, I just did Gracie Potter, the rock star Gracie Potter. I just interviewed her. And yeah, I'm still
Where do you find Moments with Melinda?
at Channel 17 CCTV. You can go to my website, melindamoulton.com,
Okay.
my name.com. And since I left 4 years ago, I've done 4 years of shows. And now I don't do them just once a month. I sometimes do two a week. So I've got over 90 shows since I left my job
Hmm.
that I've produced from
Wow.
my house with people from all over the world, Vermonters doing really, really cool stuff all over the world. Yeah,
Nice.
I love my
That's
show.
interesting. All right. And then on top of that, you're
Mhm.
also on multiple boards,
Yes.
a chair on multiple boards. And how do you pick? And I know I'm asking the question because I've heard you mention it in the video, but there was a way you said on only certain boards where you actually can make an impact.
Yeah, I mean,
So tell.
well, I'm making this Ethan Allen film. My husband's a historian, and the
Mhm.
Vermont Historical Society, who's our special funder. They keep the money because they're a nonprofit. So all the money goes to them, but then they give it back to us because they're a nonprofit and it's a non-taxable deduction. Well, the Vermont Historical Society calls me and said, "We'd like you to be on our board." I said, "But I'm not a historian and I'm not really an intellect. I wouldn't consider myself an intellect. Um, People might dispute that, but I'm not. I don't think I am. But anyway, I said, "But my husband," and he goes, "No, no, we want you." And I was like, "But I'm not really, that's not my thing. I'm not really into history." And then Steven said, "Yeah, but you know how to raise money."
Yep,
I said,
right there.
"Okay."
I'm
So I go to
so
these board meetings and it's these incredible intellectual people. And I kind of sit there with my finger up my nose going, "Oh my God, you people are so smart." Um, but if I'm asked to be on a board, I will research them. I've said no to boards that are really financially just don't look like they're going to make it,
Hmm.
nonprofits that aren't being run right. I've said no to, but if it fits my social mission, once I left my job, I stepped down from Planned Parenthood after 9 years. ACLU, I stepped down from after my first term. And I go in, I always say I want to come in a leadership role. So I want a project, or I want to be on the executive committee or run a committee or something. And then I will do something that's really important. And then I want to be done with it. I really don't want to sit on boards for 9, 10, 15 years. And
Nice.
most of the times I say yes if I like what they're doing and if I feel like it's a good fit. But I also say, you need younger people. I mean, look at me. I'm just like, come on. I mean, I'm so excited about these young people that are running for political office. I mean, we have three old white dictators, men in their 70s and 80s, running the world. I mean, this is just crazy stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
China, Soviet Union, and America. I mean, these are just these old men who don't even know how to do email, running the world. It's like, when are your generation needs to be running the world? And more women, please. I mean, it's just, well, things are going to change very quickly and very powerfully over the next 5 years. I promise you. And I think this next generation is going to bring in a whole new wave of hope and promise for humanity. I really, really do. There's some good stuff going on out there.
yeah,
Hmm.
They just need
yeah.
to get in charge so they can make this stuff happen.
And I think it's starting to. If you look at Mexico's got a female president and who's making this like the change to the healthcare system there, making and so it's starting. So
What
it's
about
really interesting. Yeah.
octopuses? What about they just outlawed people eating octopuses in Mexico and said it was inhumane to eat a creature of that intelligence, and they
Mhm.
outlawed it. So you
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
get whatever. I never liked that. What is it called that you get fried calamari? I mean, so that you can't. I mean, look at Mexico and how they're getting vilified over
Hmm.
here. And Anyway, so I just for
But
your generation, I don't know how old you guys are, but you're a lot younger
50s.
than I am.
Mhm.
50s. And what
Mhm.
about you, Lena?
I'm 53 and
Okay.
I have children in their 20s. And I'm very proud of them to the fact that they at least are paying attention what's happening in the world and they care about social justice and they go in with intent. At least they are involved in, if anything, we've said, this does affect you and they feel it. These young kids feel it. They can't buy a home. They can't get their foot out the door. It's not like they want to live with their parents. It's like it's so incredibly hard. And the student loan debt, and then this crazy thing about trying to not go for education and do this. Like, I don't understand. My husband and I, we were having that conversation last night. It was just like they're trying to dumb us down because they're
They are.
scared.
Well, if they dumb you down, then you don't know, then you
Right.
listen to
Because
propaganda.
and it's
They can
incredibly,
control you.
right.
It's
It's
control.
scared. They're like cats in a
Fear.
corner and
Right.
they're clawing their way. I'm incredibly excited for these young. I think it's finally like the momentum is starting and we're there to support their movement. And we always say start in your backyard, if anything. I mean,
Always
from
start
your
in your own
councilman
community.
to on up. It's not just the White House, it's everything, like local policy, and then it trickles upward. And women like you, Melinda, you're still writing, you're writing these articles. What projects do you have going on right now? I mean, amongst these other things that you're doing?
I'm working on a project, the Burlington History and Culture Center. There's not a historical society in Burlington, so I'm a co-founder. And that's eventually going to be a museum that's going to highlight all of the people who helped build the city, not the big shots like me, or the train owners or whatever. It's going to be the people who laid the bricks, who the school teachers who educated, the people who helped the disability community. It's going to be those people from 200 years ago up who helped grow in this museum. And I'm working with these incredible women. So that's a big one. I'm working on a memoir. I'm up to my 24th year. Kind of stuck, but I'm going to go to 76 years. They're short stories,
Mm.
about 1,000 words each of each year, those momentous things that might have happened in my life. And I just finished a children's book called Bobby Blue. It's a children's picture book for young children. And working with my husband, and I'm, politically, I've run rallies, helped to run rallies, and got involved in that. And I have my grandson who's autistic. He's non-speaking, but he's a gifted and nationally published poet. But he's
Wow.
non-speaking, and I spend a lot of time with him, working with him, and going to kick off that film in the next 6 months. Start raising money for that film, to make that movie. And then I don't know what Rick and I mean, my headstone's planted up in up in the meadow. We have a headstone. We have a headstone for Rick's parents. Their ashes are there. My parents were divorced, but I brought them back. They're buried in Pennsylvania, one in Bethlehem, one in Allentown. But I didn't bring their bodies back, but I have a headstone with both their names on it. So it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, you guys want to get divorced? Well, I'm putting you both back on a headstone. And as far as everybody's ever going to know, Robert and Betty are right here and you've been together forever. That's how I feel about it. So, and they're there, and Rick and I just put our own headstone there. So I'm working on my obituary. I'm trying to figure out how I want my funeral to go. I mean, we're thinking about the end of life for us and how we want to, every week, every other week, we're going to a funeral or celebration of life. Our
Mhm.
generation is people just aren't being able to sustain their lives at our age. And
Yeah.
these little things come in and they're gone. I mean, I had a respiratory thing a couple of years ago and I thought I was a goner. So these things come in and you never know. So our generation is passing, which is why I write for this group called Writing About Our Generation by Neil Offen, who's he's really well known in the comedy world of writing. And he started this New York website called Writing About Our Generation. And it's to write about things that 70 and 80 and 90-year-old people remember about the time that we were living in, things that meant a lot to us. So I'm preparing for my death. I mean, I really am starting to think about, I'd like to live to see my grandchildren marry and maybe have a great grandchild, but who knows? I mean, tomorrow could be my day. And
Mhm.
that's kind of what Rick and I think about is how to make sure we're well prepared and we're not too much of a burden on the family, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You have to be our age. That's a big
It
problem.
surprised me. You're such a forward thinker that you're even thinking.
Well, I want it to
Wise
be done the
ahead.
way I want it.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, yeah.
I want it, I have thoughts about this, and I'm not leaving it to my children. I'm just not. Well, first of all, they never agree on anything. I have a son and a daughter, but she would, if I died, she would put me in the basement like Norman Bates, and she'd bring me into bed and sleep with me every night. My son, if I was dying, he'd put a pillow over my head and he'd sit on it. I mean, they both have very different attitudes about me and my husband. So I just thought, I'll just make it very clear what you're going to
Hmm.
do. So there's no bickering about it in the family. So
Oh,
anyway,
nice.
well, I think you two are divine.
Thank you.
Thank you for this time.
Yes.
I hope I didn't embarrass you at all.
No, it's been
No,
amazing.
no, you're really fun to chat with, and just amazed with all that you have done with your life and how you found time to sleep and raise children, and then you keep inspiring the rest of us. And thank
Yeah.
you for that. I'm sure Vermont loves having you there, and Pennsylvania lost out.
Well, no, I'm going to Pennsylvania in September. I go down all the time to see my sisters.
I
I have
love
two
it.
of my two favorite, I shouldn't say my favorite in case any the other ones see this, but my two littlest sisters are there. Then I have four other sisters that are all over the country, but no, my baby sisters are there. So I love to, and my parents' real graves are there. So I always go visit their graves,
Hmm.
I'll
you
be
know.
out there in
Okay.
August, making a visit.
Well, there you go. Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I
But
wish you both, but what? Go ahead.
yeah, I do want to throw one more thing
Yeah.
in because it just, well, we have two more questions, but
Okay.
one question, one comment though. Throw it in is also that you also not too long ago were doing cliff diving and going overseas that healed yourself, but then you started cliff diving. That just kind of blew my mind. To me, I'm like, blew my mind, but at the same time, it almost wasn't surprising. And I'm like, yeah, I can definitely see her do that.
Well, I became a cliff diver when my parents divorced, and my mother drove us to Acapulco. Me and my
Hmm.
brother, my father flew in, and it was in Acapulco looking out the window at 10 o'clock at night. Last time I saw my parents eat together and watching the young boys cliff dive. And in order to be able to, I was 8 years old to deal with what was happening. I mean, to be dragged to Mexico for 2 months in my mother's Imperial Cadillac or whatever the car she was driving, convertible, away from home was freaky enough. But then to have that happen, and I turned and said, "That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a cliff diver. Yay, I'll be a cliff diver." So I became a cliff diver, and I have dove off a lot of big cliffs. The last big cliff I dove off was really dangerous, and I promised I wouldn't do it again because it scares my family. But I have gone skydiving. And then when I got, so I haven't, and then I stopped cliff diving because it was dangerous. And
Hmm.
after cataract surgery and stuff, my husband was like, you shouldn't be doing that. You could injure your brain. And so I kind of stopped doing it. But when I got sick and my daughter and granddaughter took me to Greece, we were in Milos, Greece. I cliff dove with her because it healed me. The 2 weeks we were there, I became healthy. I became alive
Mm.
and I cliff dived and I want to go back to Marseille and cliff and dive off of those cliffs too. So I'm kind of back thinking about it. And I don't really care what people say anymore about, oh, you got to be careful. And it's like, careful for what? I mean, but yeah, I love cliff diving. When I went to an ear doctor once, he looked at my ears and he said, "Do you dive off of high places into cold water? Because you have growths in your ears." And the only time I've ever seen it was in somebody who dove off of high cliffs into cold water. And I said, "I do. That's me." And he saw
Wow.
it. He saw it in my ears. And then my last dangerous dive was 20 some years ago. These young boys convinced me to do it. And I did it. And they wanted to jump. And I dove in and it was really shallow. And I ran back up and told these young little 10-year-olds they couldn't go in. I said, "Don't jump in, it's too shallow." And they said, "But you did." I said, "Yeah, but I know how to do this." And it almost killed me. I really almost died. It was the last time I did a big jump, a big dive. 15 years later, 10 years later, I'm walking down Church Street and these boys run up to me and they go, "You're that lady. You're that lady who dove off of Red Rocks that day." And there I was like, what, 59, 60 years old or something. And they're like, "You're that lady." And I'm like, "Yeah." And thank you for not killing yourselves, boys, because it was very
Yes.
dangerous that day. That's my cliff diving story.
That's
I'm gonna tell it at
incredible.
I'm gonna tell it at a moth coming up in a couple of months. I'm gonna tell that story.
Oh,
But
it's
it is
incredible what
dangerous,
you do.
but
Yeah.
it healed me in that moment of my life.
Hmm.
These beautiful young boys, and I thought if they can do that, I can do that. And I was able to get through the divorce and not be too traumatized by it. So, kids do things to try to heal themselves, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. So what we like to ask each of our guests and close of this is if you can go back and speak to your younger self, what would you tell her?
I think I tell her to relax, be more patient, smell the roses, try not to be so driven. And I think I'm doing that in my old age. I was out this morning for 2 hours looking at my birds, and a bluebird came up to my mealworm feeder, and I actually videotaped it and put it up on now I'm into social media. I'm a big social media person, but anyway, so I had to take a video and get it out to all my people. But I can't just sit and enjoy it. But I'm trying to just learn to relax and be more, not feel like I've got to do everything for everybody. And I wish that in my growing up, I could have played more and
Hmm.
maybe enjoyed really the world a little bit more instead of feeling so driven. That would be my message to everybody is take time to smell the roses and just to sit and watch the birds and get off your phones and your tablets and listen to the birds and listen to your own mind.
Speaking of getting off the tablets, you mentioned you're on social media. How can people find you?
Mhm.
Well, I'm on Facebook. I can find you. It's Melinda Vermont on Instagram. It's just Melinda Vermont.
Okay.
And on Facebook, I think I'm Melinda Moulton something. Um, if you Google Melinda Moulton, my Facebook should come up.
Mhm. It
But
does, yeah.
people send me stuff. I mean, political stuff, and they say, "Will you post this and get this out?" And so I spend a lot of my kids hate that. My son in particular, my daughter isn't mine, but my son hates it when I put anything up about my grandchildren. He and his wife, they're like, well, and I get it, but I find it very difficult that I can't brag because they're both pretty extraordinary kids. But they're very anti-social media, and I get that. And neither one of them does it. And so I don't post much about I post a lot about Rowan, my grandson. I post a lot about Phoebe, who's his sister, because that's
Hmm.
my daughter's kids, and she doesn't care. She's much more easygoing than my son is about stuff. He's the one who would put the pillow over my head and sit on it. And everybody says he's the one who's the most like me. So figure that out,
Right.
you know, you've got kids,
Nice.
you know that scene, right? So yeah, I'm on social media and I do yeah, and then my website's melindamoulton.com and all my shows are up there. And I'm sure you've seen that, because that's probably where you saw that video, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on. It's been such a pleasure having you, and it's been fascinating listening to your stories.
Well, Renee and Lina, I think you two are beautiful. I'm really honored that all the way from Arizona, you took the time to sit with me. This means so much to me. Um, and I really loved meeting you, and I'm gonna I'm gonna hopefully friend you or be connected with you on
Please
social
do. I
media.
would love to learn more about your
Well, what's your
fundraising
last?
skills.
What's your last name? Do you share that or not?
I
Hey,
think, yeah, I'm not so much on I'm on Facebook, Renee Thomas, but I don't get on much. It sits really
okay.
quiet, but I'll reach out via my IG accounts because I have a
Good.
couple. I have a private one, and then I
Okay.
also have my business one that is
Okay.
Body and Mind Strong, which I would definitely want to make sure I connect with you just so
Well,
I can
Body,
see
Mind,
everything.
Strong, definitely want to connect with you on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if either one of you wants to be invited to be on my show, I'd love to interview you guys.
Oh,
We could do a turnaround. You let me know, okay?
oh, that would
Check
be
out my show.
great.
Okay.
It'd be fun.
All right.
All right.
You're
Great.
fabulous. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Stay
you.
strong.
And thank you for everyone who is listening. And I think that's all we have for today.
Have a beautiful day.
Thanks.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.